what's going on there is the body's going to regulate the extent to which thyroid hormone is turning on metabolism through, in part, the activity of those enzymes. So how much T4 gets converted into T3, right? And T3 is the active form. So T4 to T3 means you have active T3. It's doing its job. It's doing its genomic based, meaning it's binding. It's working in the nucleus to turn on gene expression, which increases your metabolism. And it does that globally, all aspects, all macronutrients, fat, protein, carbohydrate. It's a pretty ubiquitous and powerful effect there from T3. So T4 is what your body produces in the thyroid gland. There's a small amount of T3 that's produced as well. And then how much T3 you get actually doing the job of thyroid is a function of those enzymes. And that's a function of your energy status.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally. All of our programming, it's brought to you by you, the people of Patreon. Thank you for your support. We're also brought to you by BYOBBcoach.com. That's Scott's book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. We'll have links to that for the ebook and the hardcover below. We are brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. Use our code ThinkOver there for high-quality, third-party tested supplements at wholesale pricing. Cut out the middleman. And we're brought to you by SupplementSource.ca for Canadians. They've got great deals that change week to week. What's going on, Scott?
We're trying a new setup, man. I got the good computer, the one that doesn't crash.
Yeah.
Actually, I kind of like this setup, to be honest, because I have my regular computer, so I can reference any little scientific details I might want to, but I got you on the computer that works.
Nice.
But I'm back in my old spot, and my crazy puppy is here under the table. Actually, I've never seen her there resting that, but
okay.
Fingers crossed, knock on wood. She's been kind of chill this time of the day, like when I'm doing my own work, so...
Well, listen, you sound good. Everything looks good. We look as good as we're going to for the day. I wanted to mention, too, I've had some people say, like, you know what, this podcast in particular is the hardest one to follow. They say, I love everything that you guys put out at Think Big. Muscle Minds, they say, is a little bit over my head sometimes. I just want to give you guys a reminder. One of the nice things about podcasts is that you can roll them back. You can watch them again. I usually watch this show myself when I record with Scott. I watch it while I edit, and then I watch it a third time afterward to be able to get the information. This stuff is not going to be like right on the nose. We are getting a little bit more on the advanced side, but it's a nice thing because all of these shows, they are going to challenge you. There's no question in my mind. Every episode of Muscle Minds is going to be a challenge. So just sit back, relax, hang in there. If you don't get it all, that's okay because you're still learning in the process. We are going to talk about reverse T3 today. We talked about T3, T4 the other week. Reverse T3 came up on on Blood, Sweat, and Gear. We had a few people who said, like, I'd love to get Scott's take on explaining what reverse T3 is.
Okay, so let's pull up that figure that I sent you. Let's just do that right off the bat.
All right.
It's a really nice figure. I see it. I've seen it reused. It's actually, there's the reference where I found it. I've also seen it elsewhere, borrowed. So up top, you can see what we have here is a schematic of interconversion between the various forms of thyroid hormone. So T4 is called T4 because it has 4 iodines on it. And you've got basically a tyrosine ring. There's an inner ring and outer ring, so I'm starting at the top there. Those are just that's just used to sort of so people can recognize, the sciencey folks can recognize like what's going on where.
Okay.
And if you kind of go counterclockwise, you'll see T4 can be converted to T3. And those 2 blobs there next to the arrow are the 2 forms of the deiodinase enzyme that can create that T4, cause that, or catalyze that T4 to T3 conversion. So D2, it's larger because it's more actively does this, is just the type 2 deiodinase, and D1 is the type 1 deiodinase. So that's what happens. Most of our T4 is released, most of our thyroid is released as T4, and then broken down, deiodinated into T3 by those 2 enzymes, which are located throughout the body in different spaces. So I have a whole talk on this on John Meadows' site, which people can go and look. But this is a little bit more focused on this particular aspect. So what's going on there is the body's going to regulate the extent to which thyroid hormone is turning on metabolism through, in part, the activity of those enzymes. So how much T4 gets converted into T3, right? And T3 is the active form. So T4 to T3 means you have active T3. It's doing its job. It's doing its genomic based, meaning it's binding. It's working in the nucleus to turn on gene expression, which increases your metabolism. And it does that globally, all aspects, all macronutrients, fat, protein, carbohydrate. It's a pretty ubiquitous and powerful effect there from T3. So T4 is what your body produces in the thyroid gland. There's a small amount of T3 that's produced as well. And then how much T3 you get actually doing the job of thyroid is a function of those enzymes. And that's a function of your energy status, right? So one way to reduce and slow metabolism, if, for instance, you're in a diet, would be to reduce that T4 to T3 conversion. And that's going to happen in part by reducing the activity of those two deiodinase enzymes, the D1 and D2 in this figure. So the other thing that can happen actually is T3 and T4 can be cleared by your liver in different ways. So you can just, the T4 that's being produced will be more rapidly removed from the circulation. So it doesn't even get a chance to be converted into T3. And the other thing that can happen, because this is kind of an important lever on metabolism to have good control over, is the body can then deionate at a different iodine on that molecule. So if you look, T3 is on the left, and you can see on what they call on the left side of the thyroid molecule, the outer ring. At the lower left, there's an I missing in the T3 compared to the T4. There's one iodine atom missing. If you look to the right now, what they're calling RT3, that's reverse T3. Instead of missing the iodine on that outer ring on the left side, it's missing an iodine on the inner ring. So what this means is you got now a T3 molecule. It's got 3 iodines on it, but it's not the same shape because it's got a different molecular configuration. That is an inactive form of T3. So it's a way of clearing the T4 so that it can't basically be converted into T3 and the active form of thyroid hormone. So now you have reverse T3. It's the inactive form. And what you also see there too, another thing that can happen. So this is pretty complex and fascinating shit. And I can't tell you all the interactions here because I just haven't done the deep dive on this. For literally, it would take months to really tease this out and be able to just talk about it extemporaneously for hours, which there are people who can do that, of course. But that reverse T3, so 3 iodines, but missing the inner ring one, can then have an outer ring iodine removed to become a 2 iodine thyroid, so diiodothyronine, T2, and T3 can also become T2.
I see that.
And the interesting thing with T2 is it has a reduced affinity for the thyroid receptor. There was a comment that you sent me before that's kind of prompted this question. That person said that T2 has like a 100th affinity for the thyroid receptor. I wasn't able to find that information. I found a study from rats, and it was like 27%, so roughly 1/4 of the affinity, the binding affinity for the thyroid receptor.
As what does?
Say what?
1/4 the affinity compared to what?
Compared to T3.
Okay, compared to T3.
That's the main version of thyroid hormone that does the work. But T2 does have thyroid actions. It does activate the thyroid receptor. So it does do what T3 does, just to a lesser extent. Okay. So there we've got another level of complex interaction where, for instance, and I'm just going to talk kind of generically, one way you could ramp down thyroid metabolism is clear T3 and make it a T2. potentially.
Yeah, okay.
And that would happen in accordance with different enzymes. The D3 enzyme would be there. But you could also take reverse T3, and this is something that is, I think, a pretty debated topic in the literature, because I've read different things, even in the more recent publication. Some people just say, T2 is inactive, right? And then some people say, no, it actually has a potential role. So you could take reverse T3, which is considered to be completely inactive. It binds to the T3 receptor, doesn't activate it. It actually would then prevent T3 because it's taking its place from binding.
Yeah.
But you can take the reverse T3 inactive and convert that into T2, which is active.
Okay, yeah.
So you could rescue an inactive T3, and instead of trying to re-iodinate, probably would have to happen in the thyroid. That may even be possible too. This reaction might be able to go backwards. I've never seen that noted, but I wouldn't rule it out because I haven't looked for that answer. But you could then produce T2. So you could take T3 active, make T2 out of it, or you could take reverse T3 active, make T2 out of it. What's going on with T2 is there should be a big question mark there as to that level of interaction. But the idea of and giving T4 is kind of the standard of care in thyroid replacement, because what you do is you're replacing the thyroid's own endogenous T4 output, basically, and then allowing the body to do its business of converting appropriately. And because of what happens in the brain in terms of T4 to T3 conversion, what this will also do, and clinicians like this, is it will restore the TSH levels, so thyroid stimulating hormone levels, to a normal level when you do that.
And that's like the first step
That's the first step, right?
Okay,
right.
The TSH.
So, and if someone were in a situation because of their genetics or maybe the diet, you may have an individual, for instance, who is just lost a bunch of weight, and now for them, even though they're at normal body fat levels, they're way below their set point or their settling point or their lower intervention point is the way you look at it. So they're beyond the body fat that their body would normally regulate around.
Mm-hmm.
They might not have so much T3 being produced. And a doctor might say, okay, we're going to give you like an armor thyroid. We're going to give you a combination treatment so we can normalize both T4 and T3, right?
Okay.
But you still have this conversions back and forth all over the place. The T4 could go to reverse T3, so it can be like the dog chasing its tail a little bit.
Is there anything we can do to mediate this on our own? Is there anything we can do to, say, encourage the conversion from T4 to T3 versus the conversion of T4 to reverse T3? Or is there anything we can do to encourage reverse T3 to convert into T2?
The reverse T3 to T2, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. T4 if the same thing you can do for T4 to T3 conversion would help with that process, reverse T3 to T2. Okay. And insulin is involved here. Carbohydrate content in the diet is super important. There's a study, and we don't have the figure here, but there's a particular study where basically going on a low carb diet, just removing carbs, eucaloric, like normal caloric intake, had basically the same effect on thyroid and reverse thyroid production as a starvation diet.
Okay.
I think it was maybe a very low calorie diet. So the carbohydrate content seems to be the primary factor by far that determines to what extent you produce T3 from T4. And this is why I don't know if the clinicians are thinking of it this way. This probably depends on which clinician you talk to and how well educated they are and how much they've thought about this. But this is one reason why it would make sense to use T4 if someone is trying to supplement their thyroid, like when they're dieting down, and they're on a carbohydrate varying diet. So they're rotating through 3 levels of carbohydrate, or they're carbing up twice a week, or what have you. Is you use T4 and then you ramp up the T3 production based on how many carbs you take, and those carbs are probably going to be, when in a dieting situation, adding to your calories. So now you have more T3 going when you can afford it. because T3 that's too high can be catabolic. It can mean muscle loss. So if you're putting someone on T3, someone on a given level of T3 and plenty of carbs in the diet, even it's interesting. Even well, I'll just say it this way: at a given caloric deficit, T3 is going to could be catabolic, and I'm try to simplify this as much as possible.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're right. You're welcome. The greater the caloric deficit, the more likely that a given amount of T3 could be catabolic, because normally T3 would be much lower.
Okay. Yeah.
All this regulation we talked about comes into play. So at a deep caloric deficit, when normally your T3 would be low, the conversion of incoming exogenous T4 is also going to be subject to that low caloric intake, and you're not going to just drive metabolism with reckless abandon, because you're not giving T3. T3 is just the hammer; it presses on the accelerator whatsoever. Whereas T4 it's basically a pro-hormone. You're feeding that in so the body can then make its own decision. And when you have higher caloric intake, higher insulin, higher carbohydrate intake, you can have higher T3 levels. That's actually going to potentially stave off whatever impact the extra calories could have on slowing fat loss, because you're going to have a faster metabolic rate when you got more calories coming in. Yeah. So that allows you to couple the metabolic rate influenced by T3 with the caloric intake. Faster metabolic rate when you got more calories coming in. Slower metabolic rate when you have less calories coming in. That's more optimized for not having excessive metabolic rate, excessive protein degradation when you're in a deep caloric deficit, because that can be diabolical for muscle mass.
Yeah.
So, and I've said this numerous times. Say this, it's come up every time I talk about thyroid. But that's the idea. So, and other thing in that question, it was one of the situations that was noted was urgent fat loss. So that's where someone's in like that, oh shit, we're 3 weeks out, we're not going to be in shape, and they try to do the, rescue their diet and get in shape with thyroid, and T3 would be what to do that with. So his point was a good one, I think. And T4, in that state where you're already dieted down and you're trying to like put the hammer on your metabolic rate, T4 is not going to allow that. Thyroid binding globulin is going to bind it up. Those enzymes are not going to convert it. You'll get more reverse T3. The body is going to, because of the energetic status being in a diet, it's not going to let that T4 just throw the hammer down on and accelerate your metabolic rate. Whereas T3 would do that, because you're bypassing all these control mechanisms, the deiodinase enzymes, et cetera, et cetera. So T3 would do that, but then T3 is also going to mean probably that you're going to go too fast. The problem is you just don't have enough time to drop that fat. You're going to have a horrible P ratio, and you're going to drive protein catabolism and anabolism. But if you're you're in a state where you could easily lose protein, you're in a very volatile state in terms of protein metabolism because you're dieting down, and you crank that up with thyroid, then you're going to just potentially have runaway protein degradation. That means muscle loss.
Yeah.
So,
all right. That was good. What would be a really nice segue is going into that question about, did you see the one we had from Casey about Yohimbine? He had said, question for Scott Stevenson, does Yohimbine work better fasted versus taken with carbs? Is it affected by insulin?
I think I covered this in my book too.
I think you did.
Yeah. It's like, this is the notion that just won't go away. So here's where the idea comes from, as far as I can tell. So Yohimbine, alpha Yohimbine, or wolskine are inhibitors of the alpha-2 adrenergic receptor.
Okay.
And when you do that, so when that is activated, that would reduce insulin levels. So for instance, when you exercise, you have sympathetic drive. Part of what that does is reduce insulin levels, because if insulin levels go too high, you'll drive glucose down, then you get hypoglycemic and you pass out. Yeah. So a normal response to exercise, I'm talking about with no incoming carbs or what have you, that makes things a little more complicated. But a normal response to exercise is to see insulin go down, especially because to those active muscles, which are already insulin sensitized, and when you've got increased blood flow there, you've got more insulin presentation. Whatever insulin levels happen to be with insulin sensitized muscle, so it's taking in those nutrients that it needs to fuel the ATP production so you can actually do the exercise, and more insulin being presented, you definitely don't want to have normal insulin levels. So insulin action has to go down to some degree. So in the blood or in the bloodstream, the insulin levels have to go down so that insulin action can be regulated by the local needs of the muscle. So that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. If you block that with an adrenergic blockade like Yohimbine, you can increase insulin levels. Insulin is anti-lipolytic. Yohimbine is lipolytic. Insulin inhibits lipolysis. We don't want that, especially like, for instance, when you're doing morning cardio, right? This is why when people use insulin before their morning cardio, I've talked about this before. So, if you combine all these ideas, it's like, what the hell are we believing here? Like, there's no coherence when you combine the idea of using insulin before cardio, and then why you wouldn't use Yohimbine. So anyway, the idea is that Yohimbine could potentially increase your insulin levels just in general, which would slow fat loss. And if you take in carbohydrate, which would increase insulin levels, and then you block the basic sympathetic tone to the pancreas, you could further increase insulin levels, which would further inhibit lipolysis and promote lipogenesis. So from the actions of Yohimbine on the pancreas, you could get more insulin, which doesn't help with fat loss, right? So that's the idea behind this.
Okay.
As to how much that matters when you're doing fasting cardio, I haven't seen that measured directly. It may not matter. Like, for instance, just taking from another line of research, people look at glycogen use during exercise. And you look at glycogen use when you consume carbohydrate and you elevate insulin levels. And at high intensity exercise, most of the data, at least the data I'm aware of, suggests that regardless of insulin, regardless of glucose being available, the local tissue, the local muscle fibers are going to use glycogen at whatever rate they're going to use it, whether or not you're taking in carbs or not.
Yeah.
At least to some extent. Later on, after you've been going for like an hour and a half, then you can have that incoming glucose then supplant the glycogen as the glycogen levels get low. So what happens actually is that there's some mix of fat and glycogen at like a steady state aerobic level, and you just use less fat and you take up more glucose because you got it there. So you use more carbs, right? And so, but the point of that being is that the muscle cells are going to use their glycogen, right? Regardless of what the insulin levels are. It's just located at the local level. When you're exercising and you're fasted and you've got Yohimbine coming in, and that's going to help. It's going to have its own actions in terms of lipolysis, blocking that alpha receptor at the muscle cell. The fat cell is going to help with lipolysis. So I have not seen any data showing that lipolysis is less when you've taken Yohimbine during fasted cardio. I have seen data, and I have to find this, showing elevated insulin levels, I think, postprandial after a meal, right? So, but then we're going back to the insulin model of fat loss, and it's and that's pretty much been debunked. That insulin levels are all that really matter. Like, if you can just keep your insulin levels low, then you'll lose fat like a mofo, and it doesn't matter what your calories in or blah blah blah. Yeah, and that's pretty much mumbo jumbo. So, I don't. And the other big thing is as far as I know, there's no direct antagonism between insulin and Yohimbine. So it's not as if the insulin molecule, the insulin hormone, comes in and somehow binds the alpha-2 receptor or has an impact on the sympathetic nerve endings that are releasing norepinephrine at the fat. There's no direct interaction. It's not like the actions of Yohimbine are blocked by insulin. It's just that the actions of insulin can run antagonistic to the lipolytic actions of Yohimbine. And whether that makes it any bit of difference, I've never seen any direct evidence, but people are just kind of like, yeah, no, don't do that. They completely block one another.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, food blocks lipolysis.
Sure.
Just stop eating. Right? Just eat anything, you know? Protein produces an insulin spike. Depending on the amino acids you're talking about and the combination, you can get as much of an insulin spike as you can from glucose, or even more. Stop eating protein during your diet, because it's going to create more insulin and you'll never lose weight. It's like, no, protein, if anything, could probably help with fat loss. It certainly helps with retaining muscle mass. So there's no direct evidence showing that. It's just sort of like this thing that kind of halfway makes sense based on the antagonistic actions in terms of lipolysis. But whether that's, I suspect it's probably overridden during exercise. And it's basically it comes out in the wash. It doesn't make a difference. So,
that's interesting. Skip just said, recording on BSG, that he said he's noticed that if he does cardio post-workout while using Yohimbine and being on pre-workout insulin, that he noticed he will go hypo more readily.
Okay.
Just trying I was trying to piece this together. How does that fit with what we're talking about?
If he's got the insulin in his system, and then the combination of the Yohimbine does actually increase insulin levels even more, then he might end up with a sum total greater insulin level. So that would point the direction of the data I haven't seen. I don't know, man.
Okay.
I haven't seen the data. Yohimbine increases insulin levels during cardio.
Yeah.
But what Ken has seen there, and the other thing too is that Yohimbine makes people feel kind of weird. It makes them sweat, and so I don't know if he's actually measured his glucose levels. I'm not saying Ken doesn't know what he's talking about, but it makes you feel like you could be going hypo. So it may be just that, that he's taking it in. He's on an empty stomach, let's say. It gets in the system. It hits him really hard. God, when years ago when I first was taking Yohimbine to diet, and it was just like, it was the worst part. It was the worst side effect of anything. It was worse than the diet. It was just because I'd feel like I get goosebumps and I get these crazy sweats. You know what I'm talking about?
Clammy sweats too.
Yeah,
it's not a good feeling.
And it wasn't too different from what actual hypoglycemia feels like. So that could be what's going on there too. So without the blood glucose levels,
and I think he did. But we'd have to ask him if you were. It'd be great to just have him here right now. You know what I mean? To say, hey, what'd you come up with?
Last thought on that too. It could be that he had low levels of. So we'd have to do it with and without, because it could be. Let's say his glucose was getting like 70-ish. So it's getting kind of low.
Yeah.
And he wasn't really noticing it. But if he stopped and said, okay, how do I feel? And then the Yohimbine just pushed him over in terms of his perception of having low glucose. So it may not have actually dropped his glucose that much, but just the combination of a low level, what otherwise would be imperceptible hypoglycemia, then became something that he made note of, and then like, okay, now I can tell, right? Yeah. So who knows?
Guys, let's talk about intra-workout carbs and saving money. So like the past 10, 15 years, intra-workouts become super popular. It's a great way to support pre-workout insulin use. It's great for recovery, and it's great for endurance in those long workouts. Here's the thing. It's really expensive. It's not only expensive for us, it's expensive for supplement companies. They really don't make a lot of money off of it. That's where True Nutrition comes in. So True Nutrition, they're not only a retailer, they're also a manufacturer. They're actually making a lot of the products that you guys are already buying from other companies. So just think about it. You're going to cut out the middleman. The only thing you're going to miss out on is the fancy labels and the branding. Outside of that, you're getting the exact same high quality products, but you're getting it directly from the source. If you're going to pay for the price of highly branched cyclic dextrin, ensure that you're getting 25 grams per scoop, not of a mix of carbs, but just of highly branched cyclic dextrin. We can mix the other stuff in later, Use our code THINK, get some savings, plus it's like voting for us. It lets them know that you support what we're doing.
All right. What do you want to go to next? Because I'm looking at what we've got here. What would be
all this drug stuff?
All right. Yeah. I was wondering that too. I didn't know if you wanted to like just keep on that theme or what. Okay. So we had a couple of them on training. You tell me what you want to do. We had the one about the 1.5 reps. We had the one about just Romanian deadlifts. Are they overrated? Let me ask you that real quick. Make this a quick one. In your opinion, Scott, Romanian deadlifts, overrated or underrated? You have to say what you think, and also too, here's part of the context. This is Ron and Dusty's context here, is that it's not only what you think, but how bodybuilding society looks at the movement at this time. You know, from what you gather of how people look at the Romanian deadlift, its popularity, stuff like that. Is it overrated or underrated, and why?
I think it's probably underrated these days now.
Okay.
Because so much of the focus has been on, finding isolation movements and trying to make sure, that your recovery resources aren't excessively depreciated by doing compound movements, blah, blah, blah. And what's missing, what I think is super important for someone who's starting off, and I'm sort of, maybe I'm stereotyping a little bit, but you take the individuals like, oh, what the fuck am I doing? I haven't really learned from my own experience.
Yeah.
And we're talking about now social media. So they're gathering information there. Those are going to be individuals who probably aren't going to go and do the really, really hard stuff. They're going to maybe bypass some of the basics. And this has always sort of been one of my contentions. And this is anything I think you could ever see really would probably ever be studied directly, is that we know this. I think most people would agree with this. It takes time to learn how to train hard. And you learn how to train hard by doing the really hard training. And if I had to choose between a Romanian split squat and a stiff-legged deadlift, Romanian deadlift and a stiff-legged deadlift,
yeah,
I would take the stiff-legged deadlift in most cases, because it covers the hamstrings more specifically. But a Romanian deadlift is a nice variation, and it gets people deadlifting. And I think I may have called him this. There was a guy that I trained with years ago, and he had a buddy who used to call just deadlifts DNA changers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously it doesn't do that. But once you start doing deadlifts and taking them to whatever 0 reps in reserve, or if you're trying to even take deadlifts to failure,
yeah,
everything, the relative effort becomes less. And I really think sports specifically, whether there's some carryover there, because it's biomechanics, velocity of motion, angles at the joint, all those things matter in terms of neural learning effects. Specificity of training is very, very explicit. It's very, very solid field of research showing that you don't have typically just generalized effects. You train a joint at 90 degrees per second, and you'll get maybe improvements at 60 and 120, but you don't get the same improvements as if you trained at 180 degrees per second or what have you. But I think with overall people who do, let's say someone took on Romanian split squat or Romanian deadlifts and did that and said, okay, what can I get from this? And trained the bejesus out of them for 5 years. They're going to learn hard training. And I think that's going to carry over into how they evaluate the difficulty and the relative effort, and how they evaluate reps in reserve, their ability also just to auto-regulate. When you have something like that makes I like this Mensurian term, the inroads into your recovery, when you train so hard that you're like, holy Jesus, now I know I need a day off. You start to learn how to auto-regulate because you've had to do it. So you develop, I think, a better sense and perspective and sensitivity to when auto-regulation makes sense. So it's just one of those things. It's like, it's Romanian deadlifts, or just deadlifts in general, is one of the purest friggin' exercises there is in the resistance exercise world. Pick up as much friggin' shit off the ground as you can, right?
Yeah.
It's just pure. It's if the weightlifting gods, I used to tell people this. It's funny, years ago when I was a college professor, I ended up teaching weight training, not because they were going to have me do that when I came in, but unfortunately the professor who was doing it passed away. like mid-semester. And so I got to teach most of a semester, and then the following semester. In fact, I think I taught it for like 3 terms, maybe. So half of a term, and then the next full year. And I would tell these guys, I would teach them how to deadlift. I taught them how to squat and deadlift, and we did everyone was bench pressing already, so we just kind of worked on bench press for them. And I would tell them, I would say, if I were on a deserted island and I only had one exercise to choose from, all I've got, are the palm trees that have fallen over, I would choose deadlifts. And they'd be like, why the hell would you work out on a deserted island? I used to see this guy's out of his mind, man. I don't know if I should pay attention to him, but it's an exercise that is just hits. If you had to pick one exercise, it's the one. It involves so much. Does it fit in every type of programming when you're trying to bring up weak muscle groups or what have you? No. Does it have perhaps an excessive impact on your entire body's recuperation relative to the muscles that you targeted? Talking about just deadlift now? No. Romanian deadlift, kind of the same thing. It's not as hamstring specific.
Yeah.
But for someone who needs the training in their posterior chain, it's a badass exercise. And maybe they train that then, so then they can do squats and they don't end up having their low back be the weak point. So anyway, I think there's lots of things that are helpful for beginners in the context of by doing this exercise that just get kind of forgotten in what I sense the current mainstream of consciousness is, which is local reps in reserve and isolation exercises in general.
So in short, underrated.
I think it's underrated. Just a second. I've got a blind dog wandering around here. Make sure she's okay.
A blind dog wandering around and a puppy. The puppy sounds like the puppy's doing good today. What's up, guys? Appreciate a handful of live people hanging with us on the Think Big live page on YouTube. You guys must have had notifications set. It's the only way you'd know that we were doing this, or you're part of Patreon, because I always let Patreon people know when we're going to be going live.
I may need to go outside here. Let me see. She got up.
We might be taking a little bit of a longer break.
So, just a sec.
All right. Hey, who's hanging with us? Drop me a message here. It's going to take about 20 seconds to go through. There's a lag after you guys comment before I actually see it. But drop me a comment here. Let me know who's hanging with us. I've been drinking out of a glass water bottle. I don't know if this is going to help without, getting as many. I used to always drink out of my plastic shaker cups, and I just, drink the shaker cup, then go refill it. Drink the shaker cup, go refill it. I don't know whether, you're going to get phytoestrogens or whatever else, plastics. But I do feel like it's probably a better move drinking out of glass when you can. Nice thing is I don't have to tote this to work, I mean, I guess a lot of people work from home nowadays. But I just fill it up, put it in the fridge overnight, and that first bottle when I wake up in the morning, it's so good, ice cold. I'm going to ask Scott a question from the Dante topic about muscle overlap in your split. Not sure I know what that. I think I understand where he's coming from. Hey, what's going on? Thanks for hanging with us. Oh, what's up, brother? Greetings from Finland. So, is it 7 hours difference in Finland right now from the US? It's noon here right now. Noon. What time is it over there in Finland? I'd love to go visit Finland. What is their take on PEDs? How is the cultural attitude toward them? I know in some countries like Denmark, they're definitely super anti-PED over there, super anti-muscle. As a matter of fact, I think Sweden is very similar to that too. I think Denmark even has state-sponsored gyms, and they want to make sure that people are not getting too big at those gyms. In fact, I think they can go to your house, make sure you're not storing any gear there. Maybe you shouldn't tell me what it's like over there. I'd love to go visit Finland, though. And Alexandria Bell, where are you from? What area of the world are you from? Dom, you still with us here? And Vake 96, what's going on? I've literally been recording podcasts every day this week so far. It is 1900 hours right now in Finland. Okay. Yeah, so you're a little ways ahead of us then. Not much. Let's see. Mindset when coming off, going just TRT or still trying to progress in gym while going in a deficit and trying to get lean. Oh, you're in Colorado, so not far then, huh? Nice. Let me go back to this question here. So let's see. When coming off, going just TRT and still trying to progress in the gym while also going into a deficit and trying to get lean. Oh, and you're in Italy. Right on, man. So just a thought to you real quick. When you say you're coming off, are you coming off from like a growth cycle? You know, I hate to use the term, but like a bulk cycle. Because if you were, I wouldn't suggest coming off and immediately cutting the calories and trying to get lean. In fact, I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make is they try to, yeah, you got it, Casey, answering your question on Yohimbine. And good check-in this morning, by the way, man. Sorry, I'll quit interrupting myself here. Hey, what's up? Tanner Ricks is with us, too. But, yeah, back to Vac or Vacky. I just wanted to throw this out there to you. If you were in some type of like a calorie surplus, you were trying to gain muscle on your cycle, I know that once you come off cycle, you're not as like full and around as you were before. And here's the thing. You come off cycle, you don't have the same like skin stretching pumps. You don't feel as big and full as you did before, but any body fat that you did gain, you still have. The first inclination is like, hey, I just want to like tighten up now. I want to try to get rid of this fat and, you know, lose this and get into better shape. You may compromise some of the new muscle that you gained, especially if you pushed up to having like new muscle. I would give yourself a period of time to hold on to that. Like as Dante called it, Scott, like the period to like let it solidify post cycle before you immediately go into a deficit. I mean, even if you are on TRT, I would probably give it a month or even 6 weeks of just trying to hold where you're at and not letting yourself getting any fatter from that point, still trying to remain strong. And then from there, consider starting to shift.
I would looking at that question. Don't take this personally, but Vac, it seems he's got it all flip flopped, right? If you're going to be on and then off, and you've got off season and diet, makes more sense to me to be on when you're dieting down.
We could be on for both. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean obviously both, right? Both is going to get you growing, and you're going to hold on to muscle better. But if you've got if you're going to go on and gain and then come off when you're dieting down without a period like that where you're trying to maintain things, rigid things over, you would probably many people would probably be better off trying to gain on TRT, right? Or maybe bodybuilder TRT if they're going to do that, get the muscle that way, and then go on when they're dieting down in terms of what they're going to look like.
Yeah, yeah. Or commonly, guys will just go on, grow, then go back to their TRT, recover, get healthy, blah, 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 etc., and maintain, right? And then go on again. And that's a bigger picture thing, you know.
But if you got the two things, one right after the other words, and you're going to do on versus without a period in between where you're trying to hold your gains, then he's got them flip flop. The cycle should be on during the dieting time.
Yeah.
This is why for like back in the day before I was even born, right? When guys would like literally come completely off in their off season. This is what steroids were used for, to hold on to the muscle while they're dieting down.
Yeah.
Right? They gain as much as they can, try to make their progress during their off season, and then they'd add the steroids in, and then that became, well, we can gain more during the off season with more gear, and then it became a continuous thing, and now guys are maintaining on 1,000 milligrams a week.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm off now. I'm just running Grandma Primo.
But that's our historical proof is in the pudding of how steroids initially were being used. I mean, there may have been some guys, but maybe it never panned out because, it ended up being so diabolically wrong as they try to gain with the gear in the off season, and then come off to clean out whatever during their diet, and they probably look worse.
Yeah.
As to whether they went on TRT or when they went on half doses, whatever. But when dieting down, holding on to the muscle, you can recomp that way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's a psychological thing. People, you want to be as big as possible all the time. And anyway, but as far as if I had to pick one or the other in terms of whether you're on or off during off season or prep, when they're directly after one another, then I think he's got it backwards. But you're totally right. And I'll add to that too. What my theory is always, I mentioned this before too, is that holding period where you can hold on to muscle mass. I think that probably has something to do with satellite cells and maintaining their residence in the cells. So you've got this, what it seems like if you overall look at the literature, you can produce muscle growth or fiber hypertrophy without an increase in satellite cell number.
Okay.
Right? So the fibers get larger, and then as they grow, the satellite cells get incorporated. So if you got, let's say, and time frame on that is, who knows? But let's say there's a couple month lag. So let's say you're on for 4 months or 6 months, right? And so you're gaining. And for those last 2 months, you get X amount of growth without the accompanying satellite cells, which would give you that muscle memory effect. That's one aspect of the muscle memory effect. So that increase in muscle fiber size in that latter 1/3 of your off season is less likely to be maintained because you don't have the satellite cells there to govern their myonuclear domain in the fibers themselves.
Yeah.
So that's why if you hold that, if you stay at that, and maybe even a lot of guys would just say, okay, I know I'm going to get softer. I'm going to lose that hardness. Maybe I'll get a little more body fat, but I'm going to at least try to keep my weight the same.
Yes.
And hold the muscle mass as much as I can.
Yeah.
Right. When they come off, and that potentially, theoretically, might allow then, because the cells have now been those, instead of at that 6 month period, they start to shrink down again. Mm-hmm. You're holding that size. That would then allow the satellite cells to take up residence and give you that permanency. And then you diet down 4 months after holding that size.
You had a great analogy. You had a great analogy that I think worked really well. Was imagine the city is growing, and for starters, we only have maybe it's a small town, right? And there's only one post office. And as the city grows and it spreads out like Detroit did, it's just one big urban or suburban sprawl. Over time, they develop more post offices. But, that first early phase, you only have that one post office. You're not going to be able to sustain getting mail out to everyone. But over time, they develop more post offices. And there's one out here and one there and there. The same muscle now has more satellite cells, and that's going to help to support that structure. It's going to help to support the city to continue growing. It's the infrastructure, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. And in the context of this question, you see that the U.S. government's smart. They're not going to just put post offices. Maybe they do. They're going to set up post offices in the middle of nowhere when there's no city that requires the post office deliveries, et cetera, to take place there. So the city grows, the post offices come in after the fact. That seemed to be what happens in skeletal muscle. So you got to give the post office, it's government work, right? It's going to take some time.
Give
the satellite cells the time to take up residency before you diet back down again.
That's a great analogy. I like that one.
Yeah. So yeah, but I'm glad that, because that's the thing. A lot of people, it seems, Scott, you know more about this. Probably you guys talk about this on the other podcasts a good bit. But I have the sense now that more and more guys, because they can get stuff so easily, they just like, oh, I'm going to start my cycle, and they get 2/3 of the things they need to get, and they don't get an aromatase inhibitor just in case or whatever. And then, or they get their off-season stuff, and then they don't even think about. And not that this guy did this. I'm not saying that.
Of course.
This is for him, but someone might be like, oh shit, my source, went dry, and now I don't have anything from my diet, and now they're SOL. So having it all planned out in advance, because it's not McDonald's, right? You don't just like, oh, I'll just go get some more, just drive through the drive-through and pick myself up the cycle stuff.
Yeah. So, Becky's in Italy, by the way, so shout out to Italy. Okay. We've got a few people from around the world here. We've got Italy, we've got Finland, and then we've got a bunch of people in the U.S. too. So that's always exciting, man.
That's cool.
Did you see that question, Scott? We had it's a question comment from Muscle Minds. I've read a lot about Dante's posts the last year, and one of the main things he tries to drive home, other than progressive overload, is muscle overlap in your split. I've never heard anyone talk about this on a podcast before, and was curious what Scott's would have to say. Both of us, apparently. The Scots. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to go first?
No, I wanted to hear from you, because I'm not sure what this concept means, muscle overlap.
Oh, so yeah, this is originally something. Go ahead.
What is anything?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to say something. So this comes, I think, contextually. Initially, Dante talked about this in dog crap training, in the context of DC training. Hold on a second. Let her out.
Okay.
I got to give her freedom to roam wherever she wants to go, so she can take her mayhem outside.
Yeah.
So in DC training, it's considered lower volume training, and you're not doing 7 exercises per muscle group. So let's say someone wanted to, and I had the same thing in fortitude training too, because it's you don't have a massive number of exercises. The nature of the beast is intensification by means of the muscle rounds, and the pump sets can be pretty intense. So you're not doing like 10 sets with 3 reps in reserve. You're doing more sets that are cluster sets, or the pump sets, which can be pretty effortful. So you have lots of effective time under tension per set. What that means then is you don't have a bunch of exercises to choose from. So you got to be smart with your exercise selection. So let's say someone wants to bring up their triceps. Right. So what they would do then is intentionally choose for their chest and their delts, for instance, pressing exercise.
That's what I thought it might have been. Okay.
Yeah. So like one exercise that people don't do much of is you can actually do. This is the other way around. Let's say you wanted to bring your delts up, right? And you can do, for a tricep exercise, a close grip overhead tricep press. So you can't really see, but where you're here. Right.
Yeah.
And kind of behind, and that hits the delts and the triceps, depending on how wide you go with the grip. So you would incorporate exercises that are you still have a primary muscle group you're trying to hit, but you're getting those secondary muscle groups. So usually that would be the arms, more so.
That makes sense.
That's the basic way. You might go back to. Like someone might, for instance, use, if they wanted to bring their legs up and they want to throw more leg work in, and frequency maybe works for them. This is where someone might use a deadlift as a back exercise, right? Yeah. But they're getting their whole lower body involved too, because it really is a whole body exercise. Yeah. So and deadlifts can do wonders for the back, right? Like we've seen that happen. Not all the time, not for everybody, but that would be a way to do that. They would do. I'm trying to think. Like, let's say you want to bring, I saw this somewhere on Facebook. People were like, what's the best exercise for your traps?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's say someone wants to hit traps. They would make sure, for instance, that they are doing squat exercises where the traps are loaded. They're doing deadlift exercises or bent over rows, maybe with an upward posture, or T-bar rows where the middle and lower traps are being hit. They would do standing calf raises where the traps are being hit and loaded. I think my answer to that question was that deadlifts do wonders for the traps.
Oh yeah, I was going to wait to say that.
Yeah,
that was my number one trap grower. Really, like my traps were never bad, but we did John's plans for a long time, and then we switched to doing a kind of a combo of Jordan and John's plans that Shelby had put together. We didn't do a lot of deadlifting with just John's plans, but then when we did the Jordan/John plans, deadlifting became part of it. Without even trying, the next thing I noticed was that my traps and my biceps had gotten ahead of where they were previously. Like they grew faster than they had previously and went ahead of my physique.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, you gotta, for someone who's not done this, it's like, it's not on their horizon. It's like, they're like, they're not thinking of how to do this overlap. But if you think through it, you think about the exercises. I mean, like I said, for triceps, you're going to do more pressing, less fly work, right? And to some degree, you have to, pay Peter to give Paul. What's the saying? Like with Peter and Paul, like I can't remember. Rob Peter to pay Paul. I believe.
Yeah, that's it.
So there's going to be some give and take there to some degree. So if you're going to have, if you need to really do isolation exercises for your pecs, then and presses aren't the greatest, well, at least you got a pressing exercise, but you're going to get the triceps. So you try to get the triceps as the ancillary movement that's actually getting some work there.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that a lot of people have found, if they're doing like heavy bent over rows, heavy presses, heavy deadlifts, and their weight's going up, that their arms will grow.
Oh yeah.
And you're not trying to train your arms with deadlifts, right? But they get hit big time. That people pull. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised that I know a large chunk of bicep tears come from deadlifting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's something to say for those compound movements or compounding movements and using them to double up on the isolation movements for a given muscle group. So you just make sure you choose compound movements that have the muscle you're trying to improve as a accessory muscle, or a helper muscle, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So, and I would say too, to the opposite side of that, I had bicep tendon issues it was kind of like under that front delt. And I didn't know what it was for a long time. And one of the things that was suggested to me was, well, why don't you take some time off of training shoulders? Because I felt it's in the front head of my shoulder, right? Mm-hmm. So we said, well, why don't you take some time off training shoulders? I stopped doing any direct shoulder training for like 8 months, a year, Scott. And I didn't lose any shoulder size. Like I thought to myself, this is going to be a sacrifice. But if it ends up helping my shoulder, then in the end, it'll be worth it. Number one, it didn't help, but number two, 8 months, a year later, my shoulders hadn't like shrunk in any way. They hadn't, they still followed along with the rest of my physique. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. And also I'll say that I think one of the things people ask me when we put together, say like a push-pull legs plan, they say, hey, it's not enough tricep work. It's not enough bicep work for me. I like doing an arm day, And I say, but if we're doing what I usually will say in a standard push-pull legs is we're going to do like maybe 5 sets for bis, 5 sets for tris, maybe 6, but pick 2 exercises around 5 to 6 sets per workout on average to start. But you're hitting that twice a week, first of all, if you're training everything twice a week. So that's 12 sets, 10 to 12 sets. So that's plenty. But you're also, every time you do a press movement for your chest, you're hitting your triceps. Every time you do a shoulder exercise that's compound, you're hitting your triceps. So now we've got all of those sets plus the direct work. You've heard, people say sometimes, hey, if you want your arms to grow, pull your arm training back. There's a chance that your arms can get overtrained because of that overlap,
Yeah. I was thinking the other day, like in my case, what I've run up to just having trained so long is I've accumulated all these sort of micro tears. In some cases, the overt injuries, but almost every muscle's got a tear in it. And I've actually torn, I think, both biceps. I know the left one for sure. Both triceps have small tears. But I've always was really careful not to overtrain my arms as much as I could. I was just, although actually at one point they're kind of a weak point and I brought them up, but I just wanted to make sure I don't do that, because if my arms are screwed, so my triceps, I have tricep tendonitis, then I can't train delts or chest terribly effectively. Yeah. You can work around that, of course. but I didn't ever try to like totally go off and blast my arms. And, I guess this is good for, living in a t-shirt, but my arms seem to have suffered less abuse in terms of micro tears.
Okay.
Because, I didn't beat them up so much. So they're actually better off in the end for they didn't get as overused as the other. So fitting with the last thing you said there is my arms actually are actually going to probably survive better, 10 years from now, where all the little tears are now becoming more and more apparent, and they accumulate for years too.
Yeah, maybe you're like your 60s and 70s. You'll just go to arm training then. Those will be like the last good muscles you have. You'll crank them up,
Exactly. Yep. What else we got?
Let's see here. How would you answer this one, Scott? It's a question about labs. He says, love the show as always. Question about blood work. Is it just been through years of experience and looking at blood work and learning to read it? Or is there a resource online or a document that I can read? He's interested in learning more about his labs. How would you express that to him?
Shelby Starnes has a book called The Healthy Bodybuilder. I think he gives it out for free, or used to. Yes. And then, there's so much information on Google. Medline has it's called Medline Plus, I think, is their resource. Come through the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and that's a really nice overview. Okay. So it's all out there. It does come with experience because, you forget, like, okay, I did this. I did my blood work every 6 months, and I looked what this was, and I forgot, right? So you'll have to look it up each time, but you just have to look each time. And the thing is that, like, I'm not qualified to really, truly do blood work interpretation. I actually taught a class at the acupuncture school where I went to school and where I was the dean. I taught a class to prepare people to pass the acupuncture board exam on Western medicine, which basically gave you enough basic information to kind of know what's going on and to know when to refer.
Okay.
So that's kind of like, it's like, I can't refer. I don't know what this is, because anytime you look up like alkaline phosphatase, what does that mean? You look up, oh my gosh, I got cancer, my bones are, disintegrating, whatever. There's many things that can only be contextualized through someone who understands how all the pieces fit together.
That's the thing too, is the way and I've gained a lot of, I guess, understanding about life with Victoria in my life. But one of the things I've really learned is I've developed much more of a respect for how deep interpreting lab work can go. Like, I can do some basic stuff. I understand when things are in range. I understand why things may be out of range. I know how we can correct some basic things with supplementation. But just to explain what she does on a surface level, it may take her, 7 hours to read somebody's labs. It's, she's going deep. And when she has an evaluation, it's going to take her an hour to explain it to somebody. It's been a deep dive for her. And it's all not only about the things that are out of range, but it's how, like you just said, how all those pieces fit together, Yeah.
You don't have like A means B.
Yeah.
Or X equals Y necessarily. The one that many doctors still get is elevated creatinine, right? Okay, your kidneys are shot, right? Well,
we did that podcast about that. We should direct them to that too.
Yeah, maybe you can link that, at some point when you look through the podcast again. But like, and cystatin C is something that can be used. It doesn't depend upon, the levels don't depend upon muscle mass. That's an alternative way to evaluate glomerular filtration rate in the kidneys. I run into this one it's literally almost every month, but a lot of doctors don't know that, and I've been seeing that for years and years. But so you look that up, and like the standard thing you see is like, if it's elevated, and there's different numbers whether you're African American. Sometimes they use the term black too. They go back and forth in the research. It depends on how they just classified people, whether they tried to determine through inquiry if you actually have African genetic heritage, or if you have black skin for another reason, right? So it gets complicated, but there's different values there, and that's probably related to the fact that of the difference in muscle mass. So anyway, that's one where it gets missed all the time. The ALT and AST, the liver enzymes, those get elevated by exercise. This is a common one with, I see those elevated in creatinine in a big bodybuilder who went in the day after he trained. I'm like, okay, is it changing over time? No, I'm not. But some doctors look at it, they have no idea. It's like, oh my God, your liver's stressed, you drinking, right? You know, your kidney stressed. You need to stop doing what you're doing. It's like, no, the doctor's been like this for 10 years and I'm totally natural. I never used anything. They just don't know what the other. So those are just two obvious examples that are so common in bodybuilders. I can just whip them off the top of my head. But there's each of those values. There's a number of reasons. And if you go to Medline Plus, for instance, that's a place you can look up what the various reasons might be, and often it's 6 to 10 reasons why something might be under range or over range. It's also important to know that those ranges you get back from your labs are based on the lab norms from that lab, and they don't necessarily represent what you would consider based on the scientific literature to be healthy ranges. Those are just the ranges of the people that have been to those labs, which don't necessarily represent healthy populations.
That's a good point.
Super important, right? Super important. So, anyway, but you got to just, each time you got to go and look and read it again. You forget. It's like I've mentioned, it's like with me learning German. You know, I'll hear a word, I'll see a word. I'm like, what is that word? I look it up. Oh, didn't get it. I've read, I've seen, I don't know where this is substantiated, but it may take 7 to 10 exposures for a word to become actively, a word in a foreign language learning to become actively incorporated into your vocabulary. So 7 to 10 times I got to look this shit up, and there are words I look up 7 to 10 times.
Yeah.
And I forget them, like, oh, and I sit and I think, what is that word? I'm like, the word for dragonfly, libella. Got it. And that's one I just, because they're all over the place. And I'm like, for like months, I was like, I keep on forgetting that damn word. And I see them. You got the same thing with blood work. You're going to have to look it up, forget it, look it up, forget it, look it up, forget it, look it up. Oh, that makes sense. Got it. Probably 7 to 10 times on average. And so the other thing in that question was, does it just take time and experience? Yeah. To know it off the top of your head. And that's where you can then conceptualize. This is what Victoria, I think, can do. You can conceptualize the interactions. You're not like trying to piece together some puzzle that you've never seen before. It's a puzzle where you put the pieces together many times. They take it apart like, oh, this goes here, this goes this here. And then you can say, we got low calcium. That can mean this. You look at this value. That makes sense.
Yeah.
These two things are connected because you've already looked for those connections, and you may have looked it up 7 or 10 times, right? And eventually you become someone, if you do this on a daily basis like a physician would. I've had clients who are physicians who had not, but they're doing things where they didn't typically read blood work, who had not the slightest clue how to understand their own blood work.
No kidding.
No clue at all. Zippo understanding. Like, they don't know what anything means, and they weren't even like willing to go look it up. And they were trained in that, but they don't use it. They don't need it. Like this one person, I'm not going to say anything about it, but it was a renowned physician in his area, and it blood work wasn't something that he had to deal with because of what he did. And it was like in and out. He learned that, 20 years ago or whatever. It's like, it wasn't necessary for him. So he didn't remember any of it, right? Didn't need it. So it was eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're a bodybuilder and you have, elevated creatinine, elevated ALT, AST, and you go to a physician who never sees bodybuilders, unlike you're like all your people are bodybuilding basically, right?
Right.
Whether they're gonna get on stage or not, they're still bodybuilding. And then that physician sees a bodybuilder. Well, that's outside their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
They'd have to go and do what you have to do with each blood work marker and look it up and say, okay, what's the impact of heavy resistance exercise on these two things, or having more muscle mass? What are the features of this particular person, this Hulk who walks in, to see me, and could that impact any of their levels? And a lot of them are going to think, okay, steroids, that's the first.
Of course.
Right. And which makes sense. That's Occam's razor. Like, what's the most obvious explanation for this in their mind? because they haven't looked it up and looked for other explanations that make sense. They just think steroids. That's the first thing that comes to mind. You can't blame for that, jumping to that conclusion, so to speak.
All right, I got one more training question.
Okay,
what's
good.
your thoughts on 1.5 rep scheme while training for hypertrophy? You basically, he explains then what a 1.5 rep is. He says it supposedly causes more time under tension, which is more preferable for hypertrophy. Could it be potentially better to just go until you don't feel the contraction, or even better yet, just before the relaxing point, using a full range of motion? So I think he's saying, like, basically pushing it to your absolute limit, doing straight sets. Would there be any difference between the 1.5s? They're both going to be time under tension if you're taking it to failure.
Yeah, I don't know about increasing time under tension, because that just refers to the time component.
Okay.
So I'll start like generically with that. Let's say that you're doing your 1.5 reps and your half rep is at the bottom of the range of motion, let's say on a squat.
Yes.
Which is where your sticking point is, right? So we'll talk about why that would be better. So the metabolic stress in the lower half of the range of motion of the squat is higher, and you're going to have more fatigue. So for each half rep in the lower half of the range of motion, you're going to have more fatigue compared to a half rep at the upper. You can do half reps, like you see people in the gym and they get like 800 pounds in the bar and they do a little, mini 1/10 range of motion at the top. So the top range of motion, you can have tons of time under shitty tension, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So where that half rep occurs, whether depends on the exercise and the resistance curve, the loading curve of that exercise. So you're going to have more activation. Let's just take this as a given. I think this is very true at that lower half. So you're going to actually potentially have lower time under tension in terms of time. But are you going to have a higher quality time under tension? It's not just about time. If you just wanted time under tension, you just take the bar and you just do little half reps with the bar, and you could do 10 minutes of time under tension. Like, look at all that time I accumulated.
Yeah.
No, it's got to be effective tension. So that's why that term that I kind of came up with maybe months ago was effective time under tension. So if you look at the notion of stretch-mediated hypertrophy and you take that on board, it's applied being something that does function in some muscles. For some individuals, I think probably training history makes a difference here. If someone hasn't routinely trained in a full range of motion and then they add in a deeper range of motion, that's a novelty of stress that can tend to cause more muscle damage. It can cause more inroads to recovery as well. But you've got a more effective stimulus, let's say in this case with the squats, in training in that lengthened range of motion. So you're doing basically lengthened partials. So you could thus make out of that singular set a more effective stimulus, a stronger stimulus. And assuming you always got it, this is the step that seems like it gets left out all the time, so I keep on saying it ad nauseum. It's all in the context of how much you can recover. So just if you do 10 sets that are 50% more effective, so to speak, but you don't have the recovery resources, then it's too much, and you're going to have less progress overall. You've gone past the optimal load, training load, because you're doing these sets that are now they're more damaging, they require more recovery. Maybe they're more stimulatory too. That's the idea. But if too much is too much, it's just not. More is not always better. More is only better to the point where it's no longer better, and then it becomes less better, and eventually it becomes too much, and you get into overtraining status.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the 1.5 reps, I think for sure. I actually had a client not long ago, and this person was trying to bring up their quads, and we added in Smith sissy hacks and somersault squats on a Smith machine. Mm-hmm. Two unfortunately forgotten quad exercises. The Smith sissy hack is the one I say it in the video that I quote unquote invented. It's on a video that's like 12 years old now on YouTube.
Yeah.
People do. It's a brutal exercise. You know this one, right, Scott?
Oh, yeah. I think we brought a video of it up one time on the show.
We did. So, and you can do that exercise. You can do the somersault squats. You can do all those exercises with 1.5 reps. And that's one of the things we did for this person to add novelty of stimulus training in that stretched position. It's something that the person hadn't done. And you can see sometimes you watch someone train. This is the thing, someone comes in and they have a weak muscle group and you watch how they train and they just, for whatever biomechanical reasons, safety reasons, maybe they've gotten to the point where they're trying to train heavier and heavier because progressive overload is important. And they've slowly but surely lost range of motion. And typically they're sacrificing training in that lengthened range of motion. So he's like, okay, reset, baby. We're going to go, not only we're going to go full range of motion, drop the loads back, but we're going to do half reps or 1.5 reps in that lengthened position. And that's novelty. And novelty is the underlying nature of the progressive overload stimulus. You've created a stimulus that's novel because it's something that creates the overload. The overload is a function of novelty. Yeah. It's new, it's different. It's excessive beyond what the system has previously encountered or has been capable of, in part because now its capabilities are improved through adaptation, but you completely, you stress it in a novel way that creates the overload. And so you can create overload just through novelty, right? The half range of motion, the half rep, and the 1.5 rep scheme creates novelty. It creates overload in that sense. It's and then it's not progressive per se, because progressive implies increasing load, tension, but it is overload. And the nature of that stretch media hypertrophy mechanism or training the lengthened position, whatever's going on there, is one that does induce hypertrophy. And some of the research suggests you might get better hypertrophy in doing so. So yeah, 1.5 reps, I'm a huge fan of those. They're brilliant. They're awesome, right? You can also, one of the carryovers can be there too, is if that is where your sticking point is, in the lower half of the range, let's say on a squat or a hack squat or whatever, that could mean that you develop a neurological adaptation. So this is what, powerlifters will do. If they have a sticking point on their bench press at the lockout, they train the lockout. So they get stronger at the lockout, right? Yeah. If you train your squat, where typically you fail in the deeper portion of the range of motion, you start doing 1.5 reps, maybe you get a neurological adaptation. So now you have better strength coming out of the hole. Right. And when you do straight sets, normal sets with full reps, no 1.5 reps, now you're better able to neurologically activate through that area where what was once a sticking point. And now you get, instead of getting 8 reps on a set, you get 10. So you get more bang for your buck per set with normal reps, because you've basically been training. You've been taking a page from the powerlifting training book and training in the range of motion where you're weakest. Yeah. So that's another aspect of those. But yeah, I think they're awesome. Yeah. And they're part of what the pump sets can be in fortitude training. Like yesterday I did, it was upper body. I'm back to kind of regular fortitude training. And yesterday was lower body pump sets. And what I did, I was using belt squats. I'm on my smart gym, my fancy schmancy smart gym. And so I got a belt there, and I did, they were kind of like 21s. What I did was, I've done these as 21s, but I did 10 regular reps, right? And then I did 10 partials in the upper third. Yeah. And went for 10 partials in the middle third. And I kind of I was basically doing partials as I was descending down. And then I just did partials until I kind of counted in my head. I was barely moving, trying to move though. And I stayed in that lengthened position. It felt like an eternity. It was probably like 10 seconds, right? Trying to do partials. So, but I was in that fatigue position. I've done it the other way around too, where when I've got more fatigue resistance, I'm not as fatigued. I could do partials in the bottom and then come up to the top a little bit and do partials in that middle third, and then go to and now I've got extreme fatigue. So where I'm stronger, I've got more fatigue. That's another way to do them. Yeah. Right. So I mix it up. The pump sets are kind of like whatever I feel like doing at the time. But so I knew I wanted to do some partials in that deeper portion of the range of motion. In this case, I went to where it was beyond failure. I couldn't even do a partial. I was just basically sitting there trying to move, kind of just bouncing up and down, right, a little
Yeah.
bit. And then I just pressed the button on the machine. I could barely stand up. Actually, I was so fatigued.
Yeah.
When I stood up, I almost fell over.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so that's an explanation of something I did just yesterday in terms of partials, which was fun, which was cool. So I think partials are phenomenal. And how you count that, how you add that up, the questions can be like, well, if I did 1.5 reps, how many sets does that count up? If I do 3 sets of 1.5 reps, does that equal to 5 sets or 4 sets? You got to auto-regulate. You got to figure out how to auto-regulate your recovery abilities based on how you trained.
And it's fun to do something different. I think that's part of it. You know what I mean? There's.
Oh yeah.
We're always, if you've been training for a decade, even, it's like, how many straight sets have you done? It's nice. Same thing with like adding a band to change the tension. It's like, what? It's just nice to have those things to change it up. I'm going to save this one for next time because I think this is a great topic. In fact, Scott, I am going to. Let's see here. How do I do this? I'm going to screen cap this right now, and I am texting this to you. So the next time we record, we can talk about legging body parts. Tanner, he says, what's the biggest difference from legging body parts and stronger ones? Is it mind-muscle connection, muscle fiber type, androgen receptor density? I think that could be a really good topic. So I just sent it to you, Scott. Let's hold on to that one.
Okay,
and
cool.
Let's wrap this thing up, man. This is enough education. My brain is full at the moment. I'm sure everybody else is at home too.
Mine's empty, so we're good. It's perfect.
All right, guys, we appreciate everybody tuning in. Of course, check out byobbcoach.com. You can get Scott's book there, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. We'll have links to that below, too, to get the hardcover. And truenutrition.com. Use our code THINK over there for additional savings and everything you need at basically wholesale prices. It's all high-quality, third-party tested supplements. Let me know if you have any questions about any of their flavors. And, of course, thank you to everybody from Patreon. We got some Patreon questions here today. And, guys, load us up for next time. Of course, supplementsource.ca for Canadians. You guys are freaking awesome. We appreciate everybody tuning in. And for another episode of Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson, we'll see you soon. Thanks, Scott.
Adios. You're welcome.